Looks like we've got 4 of us so far. Catherine, Scott, Tom Hay, Blanca, and myself. Let's give it a few more minutes to see if, I know Carolyn said she was going to join us. I'm not sure about Lori. I haven't heard. James, have you heard anything from Lisa?
Everyone, I'm Bill Brock, President of Radiance POA. I wanted to speak in the 2-minute public comment period, and I tried to reach Andrea, but she's out, and I don't guess she's able to tell you that, so I'm just letting you know now.
Thanks, Bill. We'll open up that time as soon as we start the meeting.
All right, thank you very much.
James, you're muted if you're talking.
A year and a half of this, I'm still, muted. I was just saying, I see Carolyn now. We do have everyone that responded in the affirmative to Alexander's email regarding attendance. We didn't get a response from Lori or Lisa to that email.
Okay.
I don't know if they were going to join or not.
Okay, great. Well, then why don't we go ahead and get started? Looks like we have a quorum. So I guess the first order of business is public comment. And I know that Bill Brock raised his hand that he'd like to provide public comments. We have a 2-minute maximum amount of time for public comments. Is there anyone else that wants to raise their hand? Okay. Hearing no one else, Bill, why don't we go ahead and hear from you?
All right, I appreciate it very much, Scott. Yeah, I was speaking with Walt Smith a couple of days ago, and he let me know about the existence of your committee, which unfortunately we're very late in finding out about. I represent a bunch of communities over here near Goldenwood, and we wanted to find out whether you all had considered the 68-acre tract that sits on Friday Mountain. It's a really important historical site for a number of reasons. I was looking at your PDF, and I think we would qualify for a lot of those. But it's pretty late. We're very late to the party. I mean, I'm going to try to get that PDF submitted, but I just wanted to know, has anyone else talked to you about it? I've talked to other neighborhoods, and they didn't really know you were in existence either.
I have not heard anyone speak about that. I don't know if anyone else who's joined this meeting, either POSAC members or otherwise, have heard about that property and the potential for it to be a park or open space.
Well, I mean, the downside is it would require a contract to purchase it because currently some developers have it, and I don't know how dearly or how easily they'll let that go. On the other hand, it's the highest point in Hays County. It fronts a creek. It's, as I say, a historical site. The Indians used to have ceremonies up there. Native Americans. It's got a lot going for it. So that's all I can say in my 2 minutes. But I'll go ahead and try to submit the PDF as best I can.
Well, great. Thank you. And thanks for your interest in trying to preserve that property. Bill, you're on mute. I didn't hear that last part.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just said, thanks a lot for hearing me, and hopefully we'll talk down the road.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So moving on to our next agenda item is to go through project presentations. And James, I'll let you introduce the folks who are presenting for these.
Okay, so first up, we've got the Great Springs project. Did y'all need me to run your presentation, or you've got it?
James, if you would share your screen with my colleague Ryan Johnson, that would be great.
Okay, Ryan, you have the ability to share at any point.
Great.
Good, we're seeing it now.
Perfect. Let me go ahead and get started with a good evening to everyone. I'm glad that you've all made the time to join this Zoom meeting. My name is Scott Parker. I am the Land Transactions Director with the Great Springs Project. I'm honored to kick off an important conversation this evening about the many opportunities that are before Hays County, and I'm eager to share with you an update on this extraordinary conservation opportunity that we are calling Presa Grande. Ryan, next slide, please. To sort of set the table a bit, I'd like to just take a moment to share with you what the Great Springs Project is. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, we're a relatively new and vibrant organization, and we are working to realize a vision for Central Texas. That vision is over 100 miles of connected network of trails from San Antonio Springs to Barton Springs. It's also a vision to see an additional 50,000 acres of important watershed and aquifer lands protected that in fact support the health and well-being of the 4 major springs between San Antonio and Austin. The way that we are going to achieve this vision and make it real is by working to support and be a resource to all of our partners up and down this important corridor, whether it's municipal, county, state, federal, different river authorities, and of course, all of our nonprofit partners who are working so hard to protect these iconic landscapes in Central Texas. We're working to see this happen by 2036, which is very ambitious, but let's recognize there are a lot of trails already in place and there are a lot of gaps. And that is going to be a primary role of Great Springs Project. I like to sort of think of our role as the holder of this vision that I believe is shared, of connecting our communities and protecting our watersheds and our aquifers and our springs. Next slide, please, Ryan. Just real quickly, we are looking at I think a once in a lifetime opportunity in Hays County to really shape the direction of Hays County for future generations of Texans, future residents. We have this opportunity through Proposition A and the funding that it can provide to realize these kinds of conservation goals. In the case of Presa Grande, we have willing sellers. We have the ability to acquire the property from them. And with the appropriate authorizations, and by which I mean county commissioners in Hays County, we have potentially a willing buyer of a conservation easement over this property, and of course through Prop A, the funds to make that happen. The benefits are extraordinary, not just for Presa Grande, but for all these larger conservation projects: health and recreation, economic benefits, flood mitigation, which is so important in this time of a changing world, as it were. Equity, also important. Trails are open and available, or we are planning to make them open and available to all. And of course, it boosts the overall quality of life in Hays County. I want to jump back to the economic benefits for just a moment. We have just completed an economic benefits analyses for the 4 counties, Bear, Kamal, Hays, and Travis, that looks at a number of benefits that trails and connected trails and springs provide. It's available on our website at greatspringsproject.org. Long and short of it, at the completion of this trail and with the protection of the springs, Hayes County is estimated to recognize $23.7 million annually in benefits from these conservation opportunities. Next slide, please, Ryan. I'm going to take just a moment to call out the synergy that exists with other projects also before POSAC. This would be the Purgatory Creek Clean Water Preserve, the Starnes Tract, and of course, Presa Grande. The protection of these tracts in particular protects some of the largest remaining undeveloped open space in and around San Marcos. They are contiguous to or will expand the Purgatory Creek Natural Area and the Sink Creek Preserve. They're connected or will be connected to the San Marcos Loop and Check Trail, and they will provide opportunities in the future to connect to the Emerald Crown and Violet Crown trails. But we also have a risk of loss. We're in a really volatile real estate market. That's not a surprise to anyone on this meeting. Values are going upward dramatically, and there are unrelenting development pressures, particularly on Hayes County. This is going to put more demands on the Edwards Aquifer, which is certainly a finite resource. It poses the potential for increased non-point source pollution into the springs and into the waterways. There's, of course, with development, increased congestion, and with hard surfaces, an increased risk of flooding. Most importantly, we have a very tight contract deadline on Presa Grande. If we're not able to take the appropriate action in this next month, we stand the risk of losing this conservation opportunity project. To dig in just a little bit more on that, Great Springs Project has held the right to acquire this property since March of 2020. The sellers have said no more extensions. We are on our third extension now, and they've made it very clear they don't plan to give us any more time. The per acre value of the property is probably doubled. We have the opportunity to buy this now for less than $10,000 per acre. As I mentioned, our deadline is within a month, and we have conservation buyers lined up who would like to acquire the property, place an easement over 700 acres of it. You'll see a map on that shortly. But their ability to secure financing for this project is contingent on a commitment, not cash, a commitment from Hayes County to a purchase of a conservation easement over the property. Next slide, please. To orient everyone, Presa Grande is the large project in the upper center of your screen, sort of with striped yellow marks on it. It's 845 acres in size, which is really significant when you look at the other protected lands in and around San Marcos. Immediately to the south of Presa Grande is a smaller tract, the Starnes Tract, which my friend and colleague Frank Davis will talk about a little bit later in this presentation. The other large project I want to call out is at the lower left of your screen, the Purgatory Creek Clean Water Preserve. That's over 1,000 acres in size. When you look at Presa Grande on Sink Creek and Purgatory Creek on Purgatory Creek, these two projects alone are incredibly important to the health and well-being of San Marcos Springs, as well as the risk of downstream flooding, particularly through Purgatory Creek. Next slide, Ryan, please. There was a development analysis performed on the Presa Grande tract as the consideration was made of offering it for a real estate development. This is the second of two proposed plans for development on the property, the first one being much more intense, this one being deemed more realistic. And as you can see from this image, the proposal here is for 156 homes or rooftops on this property. That northernmost boundary of the property is Hilliard Road, so it has a tremendous amount of access from Hilliard. And you can see the southern boundary of the property is largely Sink Creek and the tributaries that run through the property to Sink Creek. This is what makes this property so critical for the health and well-being of San Marcos Springs. Ryan, next slide, please. This is what our conservation buyers are now proposing. They need to reserve 15 10-acre tracts all along Hilliard as far away as possible from the sensitive conservation values on the property. That's 10% of the proposed development size on this. So there's a lot less rooftops, a lot less infrastructure than in that full development scenario that you just saw in the prior slide. Next slide, Ryan, please. As part of this conservation purchase by our conservation buyers and the hope for a conservation easement, the 150 acres would be withheld from the conservation easement. The balance is what would be available, 700 acres. And that 700 acres, as you can see, is largely the bottom 2/3 of the tract. And that means that it is largely the most sensitive portion of the property. What's changed from the original PIF that was submitted on this project, we initially submitted for a full fee acquisition of the property at $8.125 million. We're now looking at a conservation easement over 700 acres, and our presumed value on that is $3 million. We had looked at a conservation easement over the entire 845 acres. We're now looking at a conservation easement over the 700 acres that you see. I also want to call out an interesting part of that development analysis. There is a well that has been drilled on the property to test for water productivity on the property. That one well, which is located sort of at the extreme eastern portion of the property, has the ability to generate 3,500 gallons per minute of water. And the property in and of itself is estimated to be able to produce over 5,000 gallons per minute. It's sitting on top of not just the Edwards Aquifer, but in all that water draining into San Marcos Springs. This is, again, I want to reinforce how important this property is on a water protection quality and quantity level for San Marcos Springs. This slide doesn't call out as clearly as we might hope, but there is also the provision for 2 trail easements, one running at that eastern edge of the property from north to south, terminating at Hilliard Road, one running along the southern boundary of the property, which would take you to the Freeman Ranch. You'll note there's a little tiny red triangle at the top corner of the property. That is 1 to 3 acres that we believe are owned by Hays County and could provide for a great trailhead and connectivity, both going north to the Emerald Crown and south to the San Marcos Loop and Check Trail. Next slide, please. So, because repetition is often helpful, again, I wanted just to share with you how Presa Grande connects to, supports, and is an extraordinary contribution to the good work that's already been done by many of our nonprofit partners, as well as by Hays County and City of San Marcos. There's the opportunity to complete the San Marcos Loop and Check Trail. Completed portions are in solid black, conceptual or proposed portions in the dotted line. That little red star that you can see on the map is the proposed trailhead on Hilliard Road. I think this image just helps really ground everyone in how important all of these projects are. Next slide, please, Ryan. So, concluding, we have an extraordinary conservation opportunity in front of us. This is an opportunity to protect significant watershed, aquifer, and habitat values. This is critically important for the continued health of San Marcos Springs. This is going to provide through trails, accessible, healthful outdoor recreation. We're talking about permanent protection through a conservation easement of over 80% of the property. This will expand upon this existing network of protected lands and trails. But we have a very, very critical deadline approaching this project. So thank you for your interest, your support, your concern for this property. That's my PowerPoint, but I'm happy to take any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Scott. I have an initial question. What kind of restrictions are placed on the 10-acre tracts that you all have proposed?
We are planning, or the conservation buyers are planning to work with Hayes County on the conservation subdivision grid or pattern for those 10 acres. That has not yet been determined what other or additional restrictions may be on those proposed 10-acre lots.
So would those be further subdividable?
No,
And in terms of the number of units per lot, has that been discussed at all?
they're looking at a residential structure with the associated outbuildings that would be typically placed on a 10-acre property, but it's not been defined down to specific square footage or impervious cover restrictions.
Okay, so we're looking at one residence per lot, essentially.
One resident per 10 acres, or residents per 10 acres, likely together with, a barn or
Outbuildings,
Yeah.
Sure. And then in terms of water, there's no public water there. Is that correct? Is that all?
There's not right now.
Scott, this is Mark. My bandwidth is not good, so I'm not turning my video on, but the development regulations would allow an ADU that is half the size or smaller than the main unit or the main residence on the property. So that's our development regulations would kick in as long as there's no further subdivision allowed.
Great. Thank you, Mark, for that clarification.
This is Catherine Scott. I'm curious as to why it's no longer a fee acquisition.
Frankly, we have $75 million in Prop A to play with, and there's last count, something like 115 or more million dollars of applications. $8 million, if we have $8 million to do a fee acquisition, that would be great. But it's my understanding that the preferred route would be to protect properties using a conservation easement, because you affect the majority of the protections at significantly lower cost.
Where is the public access? Just those skinny trails? And are they going to be held in trail easement by your group?
There will be a trail easement conveyed together with the conservation easement. And right now we have a floating 100-foot trail corridor along the eastern and southern boundaries, because we don't know exactly what the trail route would look like or what obstacles might be in the way. Once that trail route is determined and defined, then it will be reduced to a 30-foot wide corridor around those trails. Our hope is that these trails that we are providing for will ultimately be connected both north and south, south to the San Marcos Loop and Check, north ultimately to the Emerald Crown and then the Violet Crown trails.
The other question is, who is going to be the underlying fee owner after this transaction is done, and what are their plans to do on that 700 acres?
The underlying proposed fee owners, our conservation buyers, are our two business partners. They're looking to do one split of the property, so each would end up with 350 acres. And on that 350 acres, they're talking about the reservation of 3 building envelopes, each not more, well, collectively not more than 15 acres. They're looking at it as a private ranch, much like we see around Central Texas.
It had been purchased in fee like we originally recommended the proposal. Was that for the county to manage or Great Springs?
It would be the county, yeah. Great Springs is working to provide or bring these opportunities forward, but not actually to hold or manage the land. So if we look at a fee acquisition, it would be a request of $8.125 million for the county to own and manage the property.
Said it was a preference to do it as an easement. Was that a county position or your group's position?
I wouldn't say it's a county decision. I understand it to be a county preference, and it just spreads the money further. It allows us to do more conservation.
Catherine, the original POSAC recommendation put this project at tier 2 and recommended it for $3 million out of the $8 million requested. So I think barring participation by some other entity or funding coming from another source, we were relegated to looking at a conservation easement acquisition on this.
Scott, do you have the conservation easement restrictions in your package? I haven't read it yet. I apologize, but
We don't. We needed to sort of bring this forward as we go along. I believe Mark has supplied a template of a conservation easement to the proposed buyers. So it would be a county generated conservation easement held by the county.
okay. And then you mentioned the well drilling as a potential, I guess, threat, for somebody to come in and acquire that property as a whole and utilize the groundwater. Who drilled those test wells? Was it the existing owner, or was it, the groups that have been kind of?
This was commissioned, or the well and the drilling with a blessing of EAA was done in the test well in 2018, just to determine what sort of productivity there is on a water level with an eye toward the development of the property. There are obviously a lot of permitting issues and hoops that any owner of the property would have to go to ultimately realize that. But we also know that opinions and policies change over time. And so the protection of this property through an easement would also protect that vast amount of water from being diverted into other uses.
Yeah, so electric purification, that's why I was asking. We've been battling that in Hayes County, and especially in Wimberley and in my area of Driftwood. So that's why I was asking. Is there any deadlines on the, you mentioned the deadline. What are the deadlines that are?
So here's the challenge we're facing. Our conservation buyers are so eager to see this happen. They need to get bank financing to make it work. With a commitment, and I'm not talking about cash right now, a commitment from the county for the acquisition of an easement at the POSAC recommended level of $3 million, they'll qualify for the loan.
Of course they will.
Without that,
it's expensive easement.
Well, if you look at what the value of that property probably is now, we're able to get it for less than $10,000 an acre. If it's probably worth $20,000 an acre now, it's a very expensive property with all that frontage on Hilliard Road. So I think in the longer view, yeah, it's an expensive easement, but it's protecting an extraordinary resource that I just don't think we can afford to lose. And the problem will be if we aren't able to provide that kind of assurance or commitment to the banking institution that's going to provide the financing. Our buyers won't qualify. Our deal can't be extended. The landowners who have been under the site control agreement since March of 2020 will put it back on the market, and perhaps happily so, because they could recognize a lot more than they are going to under this current agreement. So timing, I've done this work for 30 years, and every time you talk to a seller, they're saying, well, I've got 3 other buyers lined up. And usually you can sort of dismiss that. We're in a very unusual real estate market. And I think we're at real risk that if we don't see this project through, you're going to see rooftops.
Thank you.
Scott, trying to think, I had a question for you on, is there any habitat there? And is there the ability for the county to sell credits?
Relative to golden cheek warbler habitat, we've had a biologic analysis done on it, and it appears that the property is a little too far east for solid golden cheek warbler habitat. There's been surveys performed on it before that have not come up with anything. So I don't see the opportunity for GCW mitigation, especially compared to the Purgatory Creek project that Hill Country Conservancy is working on. There is, of course, habitat because of the karst features on this property for a number of threatened or endangered plant or animal species. But golden cheek, which is the one that we all think of, is not really present there.
Got it. Well, I know that it's been a project that's already been reviewed by the Parks and Open Space Commission, and part of our initial recommendations to the court. I think it's, I don't know that the commission can take any action. Certainly, I don't think we would take it tonight. I don't know that there's substantial change in terms of the amount of funding that's requested. However, that does match with what was recommended before. I think that, Mark, I don't know what your suggested next moves are for the county with respect to this property. You know, ultimately what we do is we review projects and we make recommendations to the court. And it's the court that makes the decision on what funding. And so perhaps this is something that needs to go before the commissioner's court now. But Mark, I'll let you address that.
Yeah, I think that Scott Parker is probably feeling compelled to update you all on the changes, which, you know, originally this was not, it was a fee transaction. There was not a conservation development aspect to it. So I think that, you know, the POSAC request that projects that have changed be updated compelled him to do so. I agree that it's unlikely would have time to score it, and
Mark, your audio is fading in and out.
Yeah, I couldn't understand any of that.
I heard you agree, so I'm fine with that. You know, Mark was saying he had bandwidth problems. I'll just jump in and say that I understand that POSAC is not a decision-making body. You make recommendations. You wanted an update on the status of the project, and I'm really happy to have provided that to you. But I did want to share with you all sort of the timing constraints that we're working with, so you have a greater awareness of kind of where we are in the scheme of the project.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And I appreciate all the work you've probably had to do in changing the nature of this project. It's not easy to modify it in this format. And I think we also need to thank the owners for their willingness to participate in this way. It's a very different project, selling your land outright than having a conservation easement. So I think where we will leave it is we'll let Mark work with you if he believes that the court is going to require us to rescore this. It is a substantial change than what was brought forward before. And if he thinks that the court will not move forward with a commitment to you without POSAC doing another scoring of this, then Mark, let us know. And you know, if we need to, we'll jump through hoops to try to get a group together to modify the scoring and try to provide a recommendation to the court in a timely manner.
thanks. And I'm not sure what I said earlier, what you all heard, but I got booted off, so I'll just mute myself. Thanks.
If we were to the POSAC do a scoring and bring it back for the full vote at our next meeting, which is August the 3rd or 4th, I think 4th. Is that, and then it would still have to go to the commission to do that after that. Are we within your time range, Scott?
I'm not sure when your next meetings or the commissioner's court is going to meet, but August 26th is the do or die date for this project.
Thanks. I would like to say that I think the POSAC should score it again just to follow the process we've adopted. And if it can be done. Obviously, the court could do it without us, but it would certainly follow our recommended strategies to score it if we can do it in a timely manner.
We could score it. We won't be able to rank it, but we could rescore it. Ranking it because we don't have all the other projects scored. And I think that, you know, it's up to the court to ultimately decide if they have enough information to move forward with funding or not. So I think Lori and who is on the open space?
Lisa?
Lori and
Okay.
Lisa, neither of which are on the call today. So I'll put in an email to them saying that it's likely they're going to need to look at this and provide a recommendation to the full POSAC, and maybe we can bring it up at the next meeting.
Yeah, they need to watch the recording here, and you know, I'm not opposed to scoring it, but we all need to talk about the recommendation side of things with not being able to rank projects in a, we talk about, ranking them in an equal fashion here.
That's right.
Understanding the deadlines, obviously, Mr. Parker, Scott Parker.
Okay, any other questions or comments from POSAC? All right, well, hearing none, thank you, Scott, and all your hard work on this project. With that, James, you want to introduce our next projects?
Yes, so next we've got David Baker with Wimberley Valley Watershed Authority. David, I'll turn it over to you and your folks.
Okay.
You should have the ability to share your screen at this point.
Well, thank you, James. It's nice to see your face. Are you guys seeing that on the screen? Okay. Well, and Scott, tremendous work on that project, you and Frank and Great Springs. That's just such a critical track, and I really hope I hope that can be protected. You guys have been so creative and adapting to make that happen. So my hat's off to you. Just great work. My name is David Baker. I'm Executive Director of Wimberley Valley Watershed Association. We were formed in 1996 and have been very focused on the protection of Jacobs Well, Cypress Creek, Blanco River. We do work regionally on policy and science and research, and I think this effort to conserve land. I think Catherine. I think we were on the original Parks Board back in 1999 with Judge Etheridge, and to do that first Parks and Open Space Plan. So we've come a long way since then, and I'm very appreciative to be here tonight and go over the updates on the Coleman's Canyon Preserve. So Coleman's Canyon is a 168-acre parcel that the Watershed Association acquired fee simple about 1.5 years ago, and it is contiguous with the current Jacobs Well natural area. It's an extremely environmentally sensitive site, has these recharge features, the bat cave. This project would provide watershed protection. There's also golden cheek warbler habitat on the parcel that the county would acquire. Would be also outdoor recreation, arts and science education, and tremendous partnerships, building on the partnerships we have with the county and the Nature Conservancy, the master naturalists who have done some tremendous work out there, as well as just the groundwater districts and the researchers that access this site. This existing natural area here, Jacobs Well, this is an 88-acre parcel, was slated for development, condominiums, and was an old mobile home park, and this was a RV park that now I think all in all we've appealed up about, with the county's work, almost 5 acres of impervious cover out of the floodplain. These condos are now gone, and all the old swim center, all that's been restored. This is in the master plan. The county has a plan for an environmental stewardship center that there's not funding being requested for that right now, but that might be a future capital campaign to develop that. This is the Wimberley Bat Cave. That is a very prominent feature. This has water in the bottom of it and a hydrologic connection to Jacob's Well, as well as the bat colony there. Tons of pressure. We all know this story of the incredible growth in our region, but Jacob's Well feeds Cypress Creek, which also feeds Blue Hole. We now have about 100,000 visitors between Blue Hole and Jacob's Well every summer, and that contributes, we estimate, somewhere between $60 to $80 million in revenue to the local economy through overnight lodging and tourism dollars. As we see these critical conservation priority areas, we were just looking at one of them down in St. Creek, Upper San Marcos. This zone above Jacob's Well, the groundwater management zone, and in the area above Pleasant Valley Springs on the Blanco River. This is critical. These dark areas are showing the current developments, subdivisions in the area. This is the outline of the existing natural area and Coleman's Canyon, as well as the other two parcels I'll talk about tonight, the Flocky and Romano tracts. This is just showing these karst clusters in red, and Jacob's Well here. But this dark area, this Lower Glen Rose, is really the most critical recharge zone for Jacob's Well. The scientists tell us this is where the majority of the groundwater is recharged, and these faults here kind of act as a underground barrier, and the well as the release point. And this now is part of the Jacob's Well groundwater management zone that Hayes Trinity Groundwater Conservation District passed last year. It puts certain restrictions and ties pumping to the spring flow itself there at Jacob's Well. So it'd be a very beautiful site. There's the canyon that runs through it, sort of a ephemeral creek that used to be a perennial creek, but it just runs now when we get big rains. Some wonderful views, of course, the Bat Cave, and then the golden cheek warbler habitat in the canyon. This is another site showing the canyon running through the middle and going into the dry cypress. The Bat Cave here, and other kind of karst clusters there, and then the relationship to the current natural area. This also is the golden cheek warbler habitat, primary here. We've documented nesting for over 20 years there on the site. So it's really kind of, two birds and the stone, the karst and the golden cheek warblers. And we have, salamanders, amphipods in the cave. It's just a very rich area, and, was divided into 1 acre parcels back in the 1950s. So conserving this is really important, I think, for the investment the county's already made in the natural area. So these two other tracts, this is the Flocky. It's about a 50-acre parcel. I've met with the family. We are starting to work on negotiating a conservation easement. They're also open to connecting this trail system across their land to connect in to a trail that we already have to the Bat Cave, and also selling this out parcel here, or in holding. So we're negotiating on that. We're also negotiating on this 74-acre parcel, which is all following the dry cypress, and is obviously a big part of this western boundary. So those are still under negotiation, but we have had a very positive response from Flocky family. They would like to reserve some building envelopes for their children, but they are committed to conserving that and selling this single in holding. Some of the ideas for how the site would be used, this art program and art in nature, some camping and cabins potentially on the watershed parcel, demonstrating One Water and green infrastructure, the restoration of the land. We have already taken down 6 of the old structures that were there and cleaned up, I think now, about 8 of these 30-foot roll-offs from just debris and trash that have been on the site. So it's been an ongoing process this last year to clean it. Obviously the trails and recreation, the conservation and wildlife viewing, environmental education, the scientific research, and working with the Texas Conservation Corps in developing those trails and doing the restoration. So this is kind of a view from the well, showing the natural area, and now, like I say, this is, I think now we will be able to build a trail kind of across this little edge along the Warbler Way here, kind of through the woods to connect to the back cave. And then this end parcel would allow us to kind of do a loop trail there on that western boundary. This parcel down here is the community garden that the association has developed. And it's sort of like putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. All these parcels, this was divided into about 120 parcels at one point. So, but this would require, working with the Wimberley Springs partners, but they've indicated that they would be open to this trail, connecting here along the Dry Cypress through the old golf course all the way back to Jacob's Well. We figure that would be about 7 miles of trails there that could, new trails that could be developed. So just a wonderful recreation opportunity. The original proposal was for the 2.6 million for this 117 acres. The association will retain this 51 acres for the programmatic aspects of the site. I think at this point would like to, focus on getting that part of this deal done, because our funders have said that if we are able to pay down the debt that we've incurred here, that then they would reissue this line of credit to us, which we could use for acquisition of these end holdings, and then come back to the county if we're able to do that with a new proposal for the easements for the end holdings and this 74-acre parcel. So at this point, the only addition to update, I guess, is the nod to work on the easement, the end holding, and we're very close, I think, to striking a deal here on this 74 acres. But that's what I have for right now, and happy to take some questions, and appreciate this opportunity to update you all.
Thanks, David. So I guess I'm trying to follow what the request is. The original Coleman's Canyon request was 2.6 million. Is that correct? And now the request is?
Well, the updated request is 4.1 million, but for all intents and purposes, for the POSAC and for the Commissioner's Court, we would like to really focus on the 2.6 to close that deal that would give the county the 117 acres of fee simple ownership. That would allow us to pay down the debt that that we're holding, and then that would also allow us to, the association's willing to utilize that money to negotiate the sale on these in holdings, and then come back with a separate proposal that would, depending on what price we can get these for and how, we're estimating an additional 1.5, but as I say, we haven't closed these deals yet, so we're still, we're very close, but we estimate that will be probably much more than 1.5 million, and but I think the first order of business for us is to finish this first proposal that we've put forth, but I think the good news for the county is we're willing to use that money to expand this conservation to the Flocky and to the Romano track, and I think this is actually on the market right now for 1.75 million, and so we're negotiating for that parcel, but we do not have it under contract at this time.
So it seems to me that there's no changes to your original project proposal, but you have one or potentially two new project proposals that you would want to make that are contiguous with the existing one, and maybe you all should submit new PIFs for those projects.
Yes, yeah, we did do an updated PIF, which is what we just looked at, that showed those other two tracks and requested an additional 1.5 million for that. But I think, for all intents and purposes right now, we feel like really the original proposal is what we'd like to see funded. And then once we have those other tracks under contract, come back with a new PIF. But we felt like we needed to update it just to let people know that we were working on these, and we felt like that would really enhance the original proposal to get that contiguous land protected.
Well, I guess it's hard to, I think you all need to decide whether or not you're modifying your original request or creating a second request for those adjacent parcels, and then we can't make that decision for you in terms of how it's being done. It's kind of hard the way you're presenting it. What are we supposed to do? Are we to score the project with the additional land, or are we to keep the original project scored as is, and score a new project that is that additional land?
I think we'd just like to keep the original project as scored, and if we are able to get these other tracks under contract, bring that back as a separate proposal for consideration, because the priority for us is to get the proposal as submitted and scored funded.
Just keep in mind our deadline for the funding requests is the end of this month, and for all fairness to all groups, we don't require that you have site control for a project, and so you could submit without site control. That does change the scoring, of course, and maybe you get a modified scoring later if you get site control.
Well, what I'll do is for the POSAC is that the original proposal stands as scored, and that request for the 2.6 is the proposal, and then we will do an updated PIF for the other in holdings and the two other parcels by the end of the 30th. Does that sound right, Scott?
Yeah, that sounds good. I think that works. Catherine, it looks like you've got some questions.
Well, I was, this is neither, that's not the proposal for the trail, the De Cordova Trail.
No, that's actually a separate project. That's Campion Judea and the Carson track, and I think we will be scheduled, I think, to present that to you all. But no, that's a completely separate project.
I agree with what Scott is saying, that your new acquisitions would be a new PIF and not an updated. It would just be the old one, which scored first. So you can't go wrong with that score.
Right. Don't want to chance mess
I was
that.
gonna say, you want to go down?
No, we don't want to put any baggage on that, because that's we can't do better than that. So
You got some cool stuff.
it is cool. It's really, it's taken a lot of years to get that, put all that together. And it's like I said, it's these and Scott showed it too. You've got these lands that have been subdivided or proposed to be subdivided, and trying to keep that fragmentation from happening and undoing that is very challenging. So the county's investment in these kinds of projects is just, it's so important. But we've been fortunate with with some very generous funders to allow us, these loans to be able to to acquire these properties. So it's hard work, but when we see the how much these places are being utilized, and the need for more space. We have 100,000 visitors to Little Wimberley in the summer is just incredible. But I think the county's doing an excellent job at managing that access and the restoration of the site. So there's just so many good things that are happening out there.
Well, POSAC members, other questions? Hearing none. Thank you, David.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it, and look forward to, maybe I'll circle back with Mr. Kennedy and see about timing and all this. But yeah, I think right now it's what I'm hearing is we just stick with our original proposal, and if we want to do an updated one, do that by the 30th of the month.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you all.
James, we're going to introduce our next presenter.
Yes, sir. So lastly, we've got Frank Davis with Hill Country Conservancy. And Frank, take control as needed. Present your projects.
All right, thank you. Let me see if I can get this up and running here. You're probably going to see a blank screen and then a test shot for a minute. Let's see here. Okay, hopefully you all are seeing the first slide of my presentation. It appears that you are. Thank you all for making time for this today. I really appreciate your efforts here, and I know that each of you are volunteers to the Parks and Open Space Advisory Commission, so I thank you for your service as well. As a brief kind of introduction, I'll be talking a bit about Hill Country Conservancy, just briefly to give you some context on the history of our work and some of our accomplishments. I'll talk collectively about the benefits arising from these different projects and how each of them will provide an opportunity to really enhance, in particular, actually two of them will provide an opportunity to enhance Hays County's habitat conservation plan. I'll tell you a little bit about how that all fits together. Some context on imminent threats to these lands, as well as related timing issues. And finally, I'll give specifics on each project, including a couple of updates as well. So this is a map showing, of course, Hays County, a familiar area to all of us, and some of the conservation efforts that have taken place there to date. We've been involved in Hays County really since our founding. Our first project was the Storm Ranch Conservation Easement. We did that over the course of many years. And we've also worked closely with the county on at least one notable conservation project, that being the Dahlstrom Ranch. If you can see my little arrow, you can see me circling that. That's 2,250 acres approximately of conservation lands in the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone, and now hosts the Gabriel B. Dahlstrom Nature Preserve that's managed by the county. After doing that acquisition in partnership with Hays County, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the City of Austin, the first of its kind, we were contacted by the neighbors to the Dahlstroms, who were also family members, the Rubies. They did a conservation easement on their 747 acres. Collectively, we now hold conservation easements on 11,000 acres in Hays County. Everything you see in light green is in our purview. So we work closely with those landowners on a regular basis now and forever to ensure those conservation projects are upheld in the way that we all envision when we set them up. And we've really been a trusted entity in the region for a long time. The county knows, City of Austin knows, Hays County or Travis County knows, Natural Resources Conservation Service. They're all very familiar with our work, and they've trusted us to not only get these jobs done and to do what we said we're going to do, but also to ensure that everything is maintained long-term as well. So I would like to start, because I think it's worth highlighting and probably reiterating as I go through the presentation, with some context on the county's habitat conservation plan. What we'll present today are 4 projects, but 2 of them in particular, the Purgatory Creek Natural Area is what I'm calling it, and Old Glory Ranch, collectively provide the opportunity for 1,400 credits to be added to the Habitat Conservation Plan. And for those of you not familiar with the Habitat Conservation Plan, this was created some years ago. It hasn't been a terribly active program in the county because it's been so challenging to find large areas of habitat that were ready for protection, where there was a willing seller at the table. This is really a way to deal with the impacts to golden cheek warbler habitat as a result of fragmentation happening throughout the county. So what happens is that we end up with a lot of smaller parcels or smaller pieces of habitat. This is a way to ensure that the largest pieces remain intact, and it's really the most viable approach to protecting this habitat. In addition to this, it's a way to restore funding to the county's coffers. And this image shows kind of the cycling of funding, if you will. So if we look at 1,400 credits that could be acquired through the acquisition of a couple of these projects, and then we look at the going rate for the sale of those credits is $7,500 per credit. That's $10.5 million recovered to the program potentially. The county could elect to invest that funding right back into the program and thus lower the actual costs of these projects. And so keep that in mind when you're thinking about the cost of some of these projects, that this is sort of a revolving fund potentially if the county chooses to operate it in that fashion. So briefly, some of the benefits from the projects we're presenting to you today, and I'll kind of whiz through these so we can get to the specifics, but of course, water quality protection. We know that in Hays County, water is everything. I can't think of a county more identified with water. We have springs, creeks, swimming holes. You heard about some of those today, but we're also challenged by droughts and flooding as well. And that just sort of emphasizes the need for timely protection of these resources. We are aiming to preserve some significant wildlife habitat, not only the endangered species that I mentioned earlier, but habitat for deer, turkey, quail, foxes, coyotes, songbirds, armadillos, anything you can imagine on these properties. And there's some opportunities here to improve opportunities for health, recreation, and education. The John Knox Ranch here is a notable example. They're already doing it. They host a summer camp there, and they also lease out portions of the property for anybody who might like to go and enjoy the features on the property. But of course, the saying rings true. We need a populace here. We need a community of people here who really cherish these resources and want to protect them. But in order for that to happen, we need to provide opportunities for them to know these properties as well. So we'll be I'll be presenting on some of those opportunities. Flood mitigation is a big part of any work that we're doing here. It's only a matter of time before we see another big flood on the Blanco or elsewhere in the county. And so preserving these dense vegetated areas is really key. Every bit of this vegetation you see is an obstruction to rainfall flowing downstream, flowing down gradient, and flooding downstream areas. So we really want to preserve these places intact as they are today. And economic benefits will come out of many of these. This is a portion of the Blanco River on Old Glory Ranch. There's about a mile of Blanco River fronting the Old Glory Ranch project that we're presenting to you today. So anybody who would have the benefit of paddling down the Blanco River would be seeing those wonderful views as they pass by. And this really leads to the question, I think, with all of this in regards to economic benefits. You know, what does it mean to be a Hays County resident? What does it mean to visit Hays County? What is it that you're looking for? What are the things that we cherish? And I think that it's obvious that these recreational opportunities and that these scenic views and natural areas are a key part of that. But timing is key, as with all of these deals, and so much in real estate in particular. It's a wonderful thing that the citizens of Hays County had the foresight to understand the need for this bond. It's a significant benefit to everybody. But as of now, we're in the midst of a really volatile real estate market. We're seeing land values just go up in exponential rates. We're seeing really no end in sight, because as these land values go up and more land is purchased, we have a diminishing supply of land. And so I know lots of brokers and appraisers who are really struggling to manage things in this market because the land values are going up so quickly. So we've aimed to bring these projects to you kind of cost built in, and hoping that with the expectation that the cost won't balloon in the meantime. And I'll just get into some of that as we go through it. We also have some contract deadlines at play here, and we have some matching fund deadlines. So we have some matching funds on hand from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We also have the prospect for some additional matching funds from NRCS for 2 other projects. And the fact of the matter is, on these matching funds, that they have a limited timeline associated with them. So we've got one shot at them as of now. So I've batched these projects really into 2 groupings. The first group of projects is the Sentinel Peak, what I'm calling the Sentinel Peak Preserve Corridor. So for context, of course, everybody is familiar by now with the Sentinel Peak Preserve. Here to the east of that is the Myers Ranch. There's everything's kind of underway for some Habitat Conservation Plan credits to come out of that property, about 600 credits. Looking eastward, you have the Four Winds Ranch. This is about 165 acres. The historic homestead of Buck Wynn. Look up Buck Wynn if you don't know about him, but we finished that conservation easement. I think it was just last year. Yes, it was during the pandemic, I remember. And then upstream of that, Old Glory Ranch, 665 acres that were already preserved by the same family. Here is the prospective 646 acre addition to Old Glory Ranch. And then further to the west and upstream are the 259 acres of the John Knox Ranch that we're proposing to protect as well. So really 2 projects here I'm going to be talking about for the time being: Old Glory Ranch and John Knox Ranch. Big thing to note on all of these projects, but in particular, I'll call out Old Glory Ranch. These folks are ready and willing. They've done this before. They've been through the process. They know what it means to live with a conservation easement. It's been on their property for more than 10 years now. They're very comfortable with how that works. They know the provisions. It is true that sometimes folks will demonstrate interest in a conservation easement, but then when they get to negotiating and really getting into the terms, they may lose interest. It's a severe restriction on the property in many cases. They understand all of that. They understand exactly what goes into it, the process. They've been very patient and diligent in working through that. We've agreed on price, and those values are the same as been presented to you previously. So in spite of the value surely being much greater than what they're expecting to receive, that price is baked into this project as of now, and they're ready to do it. A little bit more about Old Glory Ranch, just a few photos to give you some context for the property. This was previous to the big rains. We probably should have taken some photos after the rains, but here's some of the tributaries and woodlands on the property. These dense, deep woodlands will infiltrate rainwater as it comes down, and all of that organic matter, the leaf litter and the twigs and the branches that fall on the ground, all of that feeds into the soil and feeds the microbes in the soil, makes the soil rich, dense, helps it to infiltrate and drain rainwater in a way that prevents it from flooding downstream areas. And of course, we have some waterways that run through the property, some really dramatic and incredible canyons that also are conveying water in the most sort of desirable fashion, down gradient. Blanco River, as I mentioned on the property, is about a full mile that fronts the property, and that would add to the quarter mile that's on the existing protected area under the same ownership just to the east and downstream. They've been, the owners of Old Glory Ranch have been very actively involved in community engagement. Since 2004, they've hosted over 30 different community events on the property, and they love being a part of the community in that way, and they're eager to do more in the future as well. So I think field days, educational events, all those types of things are definitely on the table as well. But they also are running a private ranch, and they have a wedding venue on an adjacent property. So not intending to open the gates or have trails per se, but certainly different opportunities to engage with the public and for folks to see what it is that we're doing here. I'm going to give a little bit more on financing options soon, because it's important that I lump this together with John Knox Ranch, because really the funding could tie together based on the prospect for some money coming from NRCS to either one or both projects. And whether or not that could go to both Old Glory Ranch and John Knox Ranch, or perhaps just Old Glory Ranch, would really be based in part on a determination by the county. So if you'll bear with me, I'll give a little bit on John Knox Ranch, and then we'll talk about financing of both projects. So here's John Knox Ranch. Again, pointing with this arrow, give you some insight into the location of the property. These folks are also a very ready and willing seller. I was contacted by the executive director of the camp about a year and a half, 2 years ago. We've been looking at every opportunity for funding this and felt like Hays County was the best way to go, and felt like it met with the county's objectives. They've got leadership that's involved, a board, and then a larger leadership structure that's involved in looking at these things. Everybody understands how this will work. They understand the price. They understand the provisions of the conservation easement. They know what it's going to take to get it done. Also, an appraisal has been done on the property by Jim Jeffries. Jim is a renowned conservation easement appraiser. He's often training other conservation easement appraisers, so he's very reputable and knowledgeable. And so we know the price per acre at this point, and everybody's feeling really comfortable and frankly really excited about moving forward. This is Blue Hole. It's a different Blue Hole than many of us are familiar with, but for those who've been lucky enough, you've been to a different Blue Hole in Hays County. This is a spring-fed swimming hole that discharges from the banks of this cavern that's incised out of Carper's Creek. So going upstream, you have a dry section of Carper's Creek that comes by way of Fisher and then flows all the way down to John Knox Ranch and fills this enormous, incredible hole. And from here, Carper's Creek becomes perennial. In other words, it flows year round, and it amazingly looks like this all the time with giant towering cypress trees. And there's about a 20-foot cliff you can jump off of if you're daring enough. Haven't done that yet, but maybe someday. According to Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and TCEQ, both agencies have established that Carper's Creek is one of the least disturbed streams in the Texas Hill Country. So when they're looking for a hallmark to measure against, they look at creeks like Carper's Creek because of the type of vegetation, the water quality, the lack of sediment, cloudiness, the clarity of the water. All of those things feed into it. In addition to that, Carper's Creek is really important for biological diversity protection. When I first got into conservation, I think I was most motivated by the idea of biodiversity protection, because I understood that our natural areas are really it's so critical to have biological diversity to ensure that their integrity long term. Otherwise, these systems can really collapse. And so properties like this one are a big part of that, by preventing that. Little context, more specific context on the property. This is a map that you can't see at this scale, surely, but it shows different habitat areas on the property in different colors. And of course, we're seeing what are called riparian or creekside or riverside habitat here along the Blanco River, some floodplain area and some really wonderful soils here that could be used for some sustainable agricultural practices, and probably some education in that arena as well. And then over here we have Carper's Creek, where it kind of comes onto the property by way of Blue Hole and then flows downstream from there. The uplands are pretty much covered in warbler habitat, golden cheek warbler habitat, dense ash juniper and oak forest. This is really, folks may not realize this, but this is really what this section of the hill country used to look like. The historical accounts have been confused by some folks, but if you really read into it, you'll see that these deep impenetrable forests were really a part of what many pioneers came upon. And in fact, they provide enormous benefits in the way of infiltrating rainfall and adding organic matter, shading the soil, sequestering carbon. So protecting areas like this and keeping them intact is really critical. And of course, you all are familiar with the threats to the Blanco River, all that's happened along the Blanco. We are loving it to death. Of course, there's lots of folks who've chosen a home site on the Blanco or on Cypress Creek for very good reason. It's a wonderful place to be near to. And so I won't fault anybody for that. At the same time, there are some sections of the Blanco River that are still relatively unfragmented and relatively pristine. And this section here at John Knox Ranch is a really good example of that. If you look here to the south, you can see the John Knox Ranch, and it kind of extends beyond the scope of this photo, but you get a sense of the integrity and the beauty of the Blanco here. You'll get a better sense of it if you drive across that low water crossing there. These folks are really invested in recreation and education. As I mentioned, Blue Hole is arguably one of the most iconic swimming holes in the county, and I'd say in the hill country as well. And kids in nature is really something they are pros at, and I think they could teach a lot of us about it, and they would like to, in fact. They're very interested in partnerships with the county to provide various recreational and educational opportunities. They've got a camp to run as well, but they're very open to putting some things on the calendar if that's of interest to the county, so that the trails can be utilized, so that folks could swim in Blue Hole or fish the Blanco, whatever it might be. So I think all of that is could be a big part of this project. As far as changes to John Knox Ranch goes, very, very minor change at first blush. I think they estimated 220 to 250 acres to be protected. We spent a lot of time with them deliberating on which areas are most worthy of protection and which areas to leave out. And we've agreed that anything that's sort of camping infrastructure, building structures, no need for that to be within a conservation easement. They should carry on as they have been as good stewards of those areas. But all the natural areas surrounding that total 259 acres. So it'd be a very minor change in price just on a pro rata basis per acre. So synergy, of course, of these two projects, these are all tying in and enhancing the benefits of protecting places like the Sentinel Peak Preserve and the Myers property to the east, as well as the Four Winds Ranch. And then this adjacent conservation here is really a big part of that synergy as well. And really the idea would be to protect as much of this corridor as possible. And for anybody who's paddling and enjoying the Blanco River to really witness it and see it as it's always been. So to pass that vision and that experience down to future generations is a big part of what we're proposing to do. So now finally, after a lot of foreshadowing, I get to the matching fund opportunity for both of these ranches. And it's fairly nuanced, so I hope you'll bear with me. And if it makes sense, I'll save questions for the end of the presentation after I've discussed all 4 projects today. If somebody would prefer to stop me after I've finished talking about funding for these 2 projects, I'm open to doing that as well. But here it is. So on Old Glory Ranch, I gave you guys a little bit of a preview of how funding could work with the benefit of the Hays County's Habitat Conservation Plan and the prospect for acquiring golden cheeked warbler habitat credits. On Old Glory Ranch, we've done some bird surveying, and we've confirmed that there are at least 600 acres or 600 credits available through the acquisition of that conservation easement. We worked closely with Jenny Blair of Blair Wildlife. She's very familiar with how the county's Habitat Conservation Plan works. We've talked a lot with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's personnel there that know this program intimately and are in charge of managing it. And we've confirmed there are at least 600 credits that will be available for acquisition. Given that the property is just 646 acres in size, that's an impressive demonstration of how much habitat is on this property. It's really just covered in habitat with few exceptions. The county could elect to purchase all of those habitat credits. So this is where we are differing a little bit from the original proposal. Originally, we talked about sort of about a half and half match between the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, and Hays County. But if the county were to do that, the county would not have the benefits of all of these credits. So any investment made by NRCS pulls a little bit, skims some of those credits off for Hays County's future use. That's just the way the programs will work together. So if the county were to elect to acquire all of the 600 credits at a cost of $7,500 per credit, that would give a purchase price for the conservation easement of $4.5 million, which happens to be about exactly what the family is hoping for. At the same time, that $4.5 million worth of credits could be reinvested after sold and could go back into this program or however the county elects to use it. So this would be a very wise investment, arguably, for that reason, because the funding could go right back into the county's coffers. This is where it gets a little bit complex. So the question here is that there's still NRCS funds that could come in to fund potentially Old Glory Ranch and perhaps John Knox Ranch. Old Glory Ranch was ranked slightly higher than John Knox Ranch. So that means any NRCS funds that become available would first go to Old Glory Ranch. But again, if the county chooses to use NRCS funds, that takes some of those 600 credits off the table for the county's future use and sale. If the county chose not to take advantage of all of those 2.5 million worth of NRCS funds that may come, we're waiting to hear. I was hoping we'd hear back today, but we'll hear any day, literally. Then some of the funding could funnel down essentially to John Knox Ranch. So we made a request to NRCS for $831,000 for John Knox Ranch. Our hope is that that would fill any funding gap that might remain after any commitment that's made by the county. Again, just briefly, this could be an opportunity to feed some of that money down to John Knox Ranch. And I'll give you one more figure to try to clarify that further. So a few options here. Option number one, the county acquires 600 credits for its habitat conservation plan. That would mean that any NRCS funds that come in would feed down to lower ranked projects such as John Knox Ranch. In my view, that's the best option because that would ensure full funding for both projects. And it would allow the county to reimburse itself for a significant portion of its expenses. A second option, and this is kind of far afield of that, would be more like what we originally proposed. The county invests about $2 million and acquires about half as many habitat credits. In that case, if NRCS funds do come in, they wouldn't feed down to John Knox Ranch. No prospect for that happening. The third option is kind of a hybrid, and that is where the county would invest, if you use a little addition here, $2 million, plus 831,000. If the county invested more than that amount for Old Glory Ranch, then you could get the proportional number of habitat credits, but it could leave some money behind for John Knox Ranch. Okay, so that's kind of a hybrid where maybe the county wants to have NRCS funds coming in to benefit both projects. The challenge with all this, and in addition to the kind of complex funding options, is that we will have a very limited period of time to respond to NRCS. They're wrapping up their fiscal year, and they'll be looking for an indication from us within a few weeks at most as to how much money the county might want to benefit from, and to what extent it would go to Old Glory Ranch and John Knox Ranch. Again, this is all theoretical, assuming NRCS funds come in. We'll know very soon, but at that point, the clock will start ticking. So I've said quite a lot about these two projects, and I want to remain silent for a moment and allow anybody to jump in with questions, or we can defer until the end of my presentation if you like.
Members of POSAC, any questions for Frank?
Catherine here. You said the change to the original, so it would be the original submittal for John Knox would be changing because Old Glory is a brand new PIF, correct?
Yeah, well, I guess what I mean by that is that a PIF was presented for Old Glory some months ago, and so I don't know, to what extent you all have looked at that. When updates were requested a few weeks back, I made note of this opportunity for NRCS funding and for even shifting the approach to benefiting to all of these habitat conservation plan credits. We learned fairly recently of the outcome of the golden cheek warbler surveys that happened, and we were really, frankly, surprised and impressed to see over 600 credits available. And that kind of changed the different options that we would present to the county.
Thanks.
Can you walk through the, Frank, this is Scott, can you walk through the credits that are available? What does that mean? What can you kind of just put it in crayon for me and the rest of the folks that may watch this video or online here?
Right. Yeah, I hope I can do a capable job of that. It is complex. That the basic idea is that one of the a strategy for landscape scale conservation of endangered species habitat that was developed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service some years ago was the idea of habitat conservation plans. Habitat conservation plans take into account the fact that development and fragmentation of endangered species habitat is going to continue. It's not going to end. And they were trying to figure out essentially how to make lemonade out of lemons, I guess. So they were looking to say, okay, well, what we're going to see is a lot of piecemeal impacts to habitat, what they call take, as development and infrastructure and roadways go in. And what we need to do is figure out a way to mitigate for those impacts. And the best way to do so in their mind, and I think it's sensible, is to figure out how they can consolidate and preserve large areas of habitat that could provide the needed area for those endangered species. Habitat conservation plans are part of the reason why some endangered species, previously endangered species like the black-capped vireo, were taken off of the endangered species list. Because of HCPs like this one, they were able to preserve large swaths of habitat and then delist the species because they knew there was sufficient area being protected for their ongoing habitat. So in the case of the county, it's essentially the county acting as a broker in regards to impacts happening throughout the county, as well as acquisition of habitat areas. And so the county purchases habitat credits on a property like Old Glory Ranch, and then they have the benefit of holding that habitat in trust. And then as impacts are happening elsewhere, they can charge those folks for the impacts, and that pays the county back for the investment that was made for credits in areas like this.
So that's the $7,500 credits that you're talking about, correct?
That's right. That's right. Yep.
Okay. So maybe you can break it down a little bit further in terms of the benefits to the average taxpayer that is going to fund this. You know, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short version is that if the county chooses to purchase a full 600 credits that are available on Old Glory Ranch, the net cost to the county is essentially zero. Now, there will be transaction costs. You know, there could be a survey, and certainly there will be an appraisal and things like that. But relative to the total cost, you know, we're talking maybe $100,000 in total expenses versus $4.5 million of total cost. So the county just reimburses itself for those expenses, and the commissioners would have the choice to put that money right back into Prop A funds if they wanted to.
Okay.
So the crayon version for me, Scott, because I always have to break it down to that, is if someone wants to build a road through habitat, for example, they go to the county, you know, builds roads, and if it's right through habitat, then if it's destroying 600 acres of habitat, they've got to pay the county for that destruction. And the county will sell those 600 credits that they have to that developer for $7,500 an acre, thereby getting their $4.5 million back, because they now have those credits available for sale.
And then utilize those to protect habitat elsewhere, correct?
Well, it'll be this habitat that's been protected.
Right.
So the county buys these credits now and then sells them later, and it gets reimbursed by the developer who's destroying the habitat elsewhere.
Okay.
Because they protected this.
Thanks, Scott. So Frank, so in terms of like proportion of the properties that you're talking about here, what percentage of those are actual habitat versus not? You know, you talked about the Golden Cheek Warbler and those sorts of things, which obviously Hill Country is benefits from, if you will. But like, what percentage of this? I mean, you had the point about the forestation, and this is what people would see. I saw a lot of ash juniper, which is not what we would have seen 200-300 years ago. So, you know, can you expand on that a little bit? Like, what percentage of what you're talking about is going to be, you know, truly, you know, habitat for Golden Cheek Warbler or black-cap vireo or whatever?
Yes, so it's all Golden Cheek Warbler habitat, and Old Glory Ranch in total size is 646 acres. Out of that, approximately 600 acres is considered habitat. And that's through actually witnessing of the birds on the property. So it's covered in habitat, I think is fair to say.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Mark, I have a question for you, if you're still got the bandwidth there. Has the county utilized these credits in the past for acquiring additional parkland? I guess, you know, from the POSAC's perspective, we need to understand, when looking at this type of funding, is there the opportunity to have these funds go back into additional parks and open space? And is there precedent for that?
Yes, the bank we have currently isn't large enough to have warranted 3 phases, but the program is built to work that way and should. In long term, I believe it will.
Mark, my understanding is the county is in lack of needed credits. Is that fair to say?
Yes, with the development we have going and with the land values where they are, we need to establish a larger bank. Yes.
And the cost for those credits is usually kind of cost prohibitive, but this rate makes it work, as I understand it.
Hey everyone, this is Alexandra. I just wanted to add you guys might have clarified this already, but just to kind of reiterate it if it has already been said. But so as far as offsetting the destruction, you know, and or impacts, basically it's destruction, the direct or indirect to whatever habitat is being negatively impacted by the construction, whether it's internal from the county or developers, you know. So we also internally mitigate with credits as well. So, you know, we have to mitigate for anything that the county does and the county's plans as well. So it's not like, you know, we're just doing it to developers and we get a free pass. We also self-mitigate for anything we're doing within endangered species habitat as well. So there's that component. And then there's also, so, you know, we have to have a positive bank account basically before we can, it's not like a credit card, it's more like a debit card and checking account where we have to have something in the bank before we can sell it. So, you know, there's kind of that chicken and the egg conundrum. But essentially it's, if a developer is planning on doing X, Y, and Z, and it's going to negatively impact the endangered species habitat, then they, you know, need to mitigate for that, for both direct and indirect impacts, whatever it is they're doing. And they can do that by purchasing these credits based on the calculation of how much they're affecting. And then the money that is provided to the county through the sale of that, it doesn't go into the general fund, it goes into the specific RHCP fund, which basically means it can only then be spent on activities, management tasks, and land acquisition that qualify and are part of the RHCP in that program. So the types of, you know, like repurposing, I guess, those funds into additional park and land space would really be similar types of parks like Sentinel Peak Preserve and Park and or green spaces. It wouldn't be able to be utilized, I don't believe, for, you know, like public urban parks. I mean, the open spaces also obviously can be public as well, but just not so much urban parks. I just wanted to put that in there. And Mark, if I'm incorrect, you know, just let me know.
Okay, good. Thank you, Alexandra. And I think I'm going to carry on and we can have additional questions at the end, just for the sake of making sure I get through the whole presentation without keeping people too late. So the next grouping of projects I'm referring to is the San Marcos Conservation Landscape, and you can get some context, a revision of what you saw earlier, but I won't go into it. But I'm presenting in particular on two of these projects, Starnes and the Purgatory Creek, what I'm calling the Purgatory Creek Natural Area, just for ease of reference. So a little context on the Purgatory Creek Natural Area. This area was protected by the owners previously. Some folks know this as the Lacima Preserve. There's some existing development under the same name that's in that area. This was done through the county's Habitat Conservation Plan. It was one of the first, maybe the first, I'm not sure, project through that HCP. So these folks are very familiar with how the program works. They are proposing acquisition of this 1,068 acres here, shown here. They've also pitched the idea of protecting an additional 321 acres right here as well. And that's, you know, certainly on the table, but I'm not presenting on that today. That's not part of the current proposal. We're really trying to remain focused on this 1,068 acres right now. We've been working with the landowners since early 2020 on due diligence on the project. We've got this about as far forward as you can get it without closing the deal with financing in hand. Purchase and sale agreement has been drafted and executed. We've negotiated the conservation easement with terms similar to the easement on the neighboring tract. We've had bird surveying, golden cheek warbler surveying done on the property as well, again by Blair Wildlife. And you can see just how, you know, not only do we have willing sellers in an immensely, really fast growing area, but if you look at the location of the property in relation to San Marcos, you can get a sense of just how important it is for closing that loop that we looked at earlier during Scott Parker's presentation. And also for really offering some opportunities in an area where there's greater diversity of people, more different communities coming together. and providing the potential for trail access as well in this area. So, this is just an example of the types of views that you could enjoy with trails on the Purgatory Creek Natural Area. There's also these big, deep canyons that run through the property. This is kind of an overlook from up on top of a bluff. But, you look over this and you think there's not much to it and you can't get through it. But in fact, there's incredible trees all throughout here and incredible diversity because this is such a mature forest. There's just all sorts of little discoveries that can be made in these areas. And I can imagine that a winding trail through these areas would be really, really an astounding experience for everybody who could do it. In addition to this, this is within the recharge zone for the Edwards Aquifer. So there's a lot of little conduits and features like this one that can convey water, clean water directly to the aquifer. And these vast areas of open space also serve an important function of flood mitigation. It's absolutely true, and maybe I don't need to say for this audience, but having a well-vegetated landscape like this one is the very best mitigation measure against floods. Here's the mapping that's been done for the prospect of Habitat Conservation Plan credits. Out of this 1,068 acres, we have 792 credits that could come out of it. It's also a very, very large amount. And frankly, we've done some surveying of the county to see where habitat patches might be that could be as sizable as this one. And we can count them on our hands. Old Glory Ranch being one of them, this being a second one. And then there's a couple others where willing sellers are not at the table. So it's hard to really refer to those as being viable. So we're looking at really slim pickings for the county as far as their habitat conservation plan. A little bit on financing. This is going to look very familiar to you all now. Hopefully you're getting used to it and starting to wrap your heads around it. But in regards to this particular property, we have about 792 credits on the table. The sale of those credits at that same rate of $7,500 per credit could result in a total sale price of about $6 million. And again, Alexander and Mark did a good job of explaining how that could be utilized. Now, we do have kind of the scales tipping not in our favor as of right now. As I mentioned, the owners have been focused since early on in 2020 on putting this prospect together. They've watched the whole bond program take shape and been working closely with us on updates as time goes on. But in the meantime, the real estate market has been on a tear, and housing is in very, very, very high demand. So, on the side of the conservation easement, we have things working against us here. There's a lot of uncertainty and waiting on the process. The holding costs are really impacting things as well. But as land values go up and their investors start to look at this and say, is this really a good idea for us? We're losing favor as time goes on. So, just to further emphasize the timeline here, we started early last year. What was presented as far as an update for the Purgatory Creek Natural Area project is a request for a county commitment. That's not cash by any means. They understand that takes more time, but they're looking from a genuine commitment from the county by end of September. So that gives us another couple months and a week, I guess, before they're asking to have that commitment firm. But without that commitment, they're saying that they could cut ties, and they have the right to do that according to our current purchase and sale agreement. So now I'll talk about this.
Frank,
Yeah, please, go ahead.
just on that one, it doesn't appear that there are any updates to the project other than timing. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, they're not planning to change price or anything like that. I do want to make it clear that, a discounted price does not get us there. So they have an appraisal evidencing, the purchase price. Arguably, that price could be going up over time, but I think that they're comfortable staying at the you. 'Cause
I lost Frank. Am I the only?
No, we lost him.
I'm going to text him.
What's going on?
Frank, are you back?
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, strange. Okay, let me see if I can get things back up and running. Looks like my internet connection went unstable for us.
You and everyone else apparently, right? Last
Yeah.
few days. So one question, so the funding request was 17.7 million, and that remains the same. And that's for the purchase of a conservation easement.
That's correct.
And the terms of that easement would allow what type of development in the future, and who would be the fee simple owner?
It'd be 5 parcels, and it'd be under the same ownership as it is today. These folks are very conservation minded. They do development as well, but they absolutely understand the need for conservation and understand how it works. So each parcel would have the right to 1 residential building site, which is like what was described earlier: a home, outbuildings, things like that. Very limited impervious cover. All of the habitat would be preserved within that. Pretty strict limitations on that 1,068 acres.
How much access would we get? Or the public would get, the public.
Sure. Yeah, I think
With
that
respect to like Blanco and, the areas that are, obviously the attractions for this parcel, these 2 parcels rather.
yes, they're in the face of Purgatory Creek Natural Area, they're very eager to have trails on the property. That would be that and different field days and such. I think that they're open to. Wouldn't be treated as a park per se, but certainly trail access is something they're really keen on.
So ability to access the river and things of that sort is.
Yeah, there's no live water, permanent water on the property. So it'd be more of a, hiking through canyons and savannas and deep forests and things like that, rather than along a creek or a river.
Okay. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up with the different properties, obviously. Sounds like
presenting them all together does make it complicated to understand.
No problem.
Right.
Thanks, Frank.
Sure.
Similarly, and the question is that trail going to be a permanent easement for trail, or just days where people are invited to come out?
No, I think they want a permanent trail on the property.
Who would hold that?
I think that'd be in the county's management. Yeah,
Yeah, thanks.
we haven't decided who would hold the conservation easement. Hill Country Conservancy would certainly be open to holding this easement if the county preferred. But as far as trail management, managing that access, that would be in the county's responsibility.
The maintenance of the trail would be county versus.
And I think we can look to the Dahlstrom, the Gay Ruby Dahlstrom Nature Preserve as a template for that. That's a conservation easement held by Hill Country Conservancy, where the county leases a portion of the property for the purpose of trail access, and they manage that access through a booking system, on-site steward, scheduling, and all of those things as well. So if you'll bear with me, I'll go to Starnes now, and and then I'll wrap up, and we can, to the extent there's time, we can have more questions. So this is really one of the simpler prospects I'm presenting to you all today. Starnes Ranch is a smaller tract of land, about 52 acres. You can see it highlighted in red here. Adjacent to it are these existing conservation lands. City of San Marcos is to the southeast. This gentleman approached us a couple years ago, about the prospect for the sale of a conservation easement on his property. He's very conservation minded. He loves his land, loves the hill country. This was ranked by a group of conservation professionals. We had about 12 of them ranking a program that Hill Country Conservancy manages. And out of that, this is one of the top 4 projects within that program. We are sending some NRCS money his way as a result, but we still have a closing gap. To date, NRCS has obligated or secured $190,000 for purchase of conservation easement. And the price hasn't changed. I guess this is a new project to you all. The PIF was submitted a few months ago, but hasn't yet been ranked or scored. The request is for just $100,000. So it's one of the smaller requests being made of the county at this time. The property, like many others, is dense in vegetation and has a couple of waterways on the property. Sink Creek, I didn't give context here, flows through the middle of the property. And then Little Sink Creek, a tributary to Sink Creek, flows through that as well. Sink Creek is renowned for a lot of the different karst features or recharge features that are within its beds and its banks. So as that water flows downstream, it will sink down into the aquifer in many cases and then discharge at San Marcos Springs, or the water runs off and makes its way all the way to the San Marcos River. So it's really kind of critically located. As with that, just thinking about its location, it's going to be really important for flood mitigation as well. And some habitat protection to come out of the property. Porcupines, foxes, quail, all of those have been seen out here. Now, the property is contiguous with a lot of these conservation efforts. So you can see again, just how it ties in, with a greater focus here on the Starnes property. This contiguity and connectivity is a way to preserve the integrity of the habitat and these water resources. So there's a strong argument for it, this being kind of a keyhole within all the conservation efforts being made here. As I mentioned, we've confirmed funding through the NRCS. We spent some time awaiting the county's proceedings with this program and the ranking process and whatnot. We've performed an appraisal on the property to get a sense of price and determined that we needed a little bit more money to make it happen. So $190,000 being obligated from the NRCS at this time, and just a small amount of remainder costs being requested from Hays County. Now that NRCS funds, they could expire soon. So we're not under a real tight timeline. Pardon the noise, it's bedtime here for some little ones. But we do, we're hoping that, that you all understand in your ranking that this is a timely project and shovel ready as they come. So I'll kind of conclude here with this slide and the next one. This is, again, that image showing all the different conservation projects here. Our aim is to help, as with Great Springs Project, to close the loop that goes around the city of San Marcos. I think San Marcos is frequently ranked as the #1 fastest growing city in the US, and seems to continue in that vein. And what a gift to the city of San Marcos and to Hays County to have all this conservation surrounding it. I mean, I think that we too often celebrate conservation efforts around New York City and places like that that are certainly notable. But I like to point people back to what we've done here in Hays County in particular. It's really amazing to see an entire city surrounded by green space. So I'm hoping that we can add to that. I know that Mr. Starnes and Mrs. Starnes would like to be a part of that as well. And we want to pledge our support also for the Presa Grande project. We believe that's a really important part of this whole fabric of conservation to surround the county, or the city rather. And finally, I just want to, say to you all that protection of these properties is important for ensuring the quality of life and the natural environment of both the citizens of Hays County and all the folks who come into the county on a regular basis. Any investment made in conservation like this truly lasts well beyond our lifetimes and ensures that we're passing on a thriving economy and the type of lifestyle that we all enjoy so much to our kids and grandkids and those far beyond that. And of course, the question with all these protection efforts that often comes up is we see lands developed as time goes on and we wonder, why didn't we think 10 years ago, 20 years ago to pay that price that made so much sense at that point? If only we'd had the foresight. So I'm glad we're all here today with some foresight benefiting us. And that just begs the question on some of these conservation prospects. If we don't protect them now, then when? Thank you.
Well said. Thank you, Frank. POSAC members, questions for Frank?
Frank, would you be willing to, sorry, I'm gonna turn my video on again. Would you be willing to, like, I mean, a lot of these, like you talked about scheduling access to trails, you know, obviously Blue Hole and Jacob's Well in where I live, close to where I live anyway, you know, obviously we have to regulate that to some degree or another. But would you be willing to open that access up, you know, consistently to just whoever wants to show up and go? I mean, is that part of this plan that you guys have? You know, I think Catherine and I are on the same page when it comes to like public access, right? You know, we're investing taxpayer money into these different conservation easements and things of that sort, or potentially. You know, that's important to me. I think it's important to our constituents that we've been asked to kind of represent here. So, I mean, what's your take on that, Frank?
Yeah, I think that's specific to each property. So certainly, I think with the Purgatory Creek natural area, that's something that they would be open to. That's something they've kind of led with, the prospect for ongoing trails, and I think that you know, if you look to Dahlstrom Ranch and see how they manage that, that's a way how you can, you know, balance private ownership, you know, which is extremely expensive. I mean, it changes the price dramatically on many of these projects. Actually, in the case of Purgatory Creek Natural Area, if the county wanted to have, you know, full trail access, they could purchase the property outright and open the gates however they choose. And the development threat is so great on that property that the price would not be dramatically greater. So that's an option. But what we're presenting today is a conservation easement purchase. In the case of Old Glory Ranch, that's run as a private ranch, and they derive economic income from the private access to the ranch through hunting leases, through livestock use. There's all sorts of hazards that would be associated with just letting people run onto the property whenever they like. And, you know, you'd be acquiring the conservation easement for a fraction of the cost of what it would take to purchase land outright for that type of access. John Knox Ranch, I think they're open. They could, you know, certainly be open to different weekends and such that don't interfere with the camp and, you know, the enjoyment of that camp. And that's how they can keep the camp viable, is through having that type of those programs and such. Starnes Ranch is, you know, much more in the private management vein of any of these projects. They do different events out there. They have camp groups and church groups and such out there. They do a lot for kids. But at the same time, you know, they're eager to preserve that private enjoyment and you know, don't necessarily want folks coming across the property on a daily basis. But for $100,000, it's just it's a tiny cost to consider what's being accomplished. I think, you know, what I didn't get to say some time ago, I didn't do a very capable job early on of presenting on conservation easements, is that there's a common misconception that folks should acquire access as a result of conservation easements. But the fact of the matter is that so much of these natural infrastructure needs that we have for flood mitigation, for habitat protection, if we made these projects contingent, and I'm just speaking about conservation projects as a whole, on access, we wouldn't be able to effectively preserve these resources the way that we need to, because private landowners wouldn't be interested. So I think there's just a whole array of benefits that come out of these projects that are important to highlight when we talk about the prospect for access as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just going to say one more thing about some of these that are in the San Marcos area. I'm sorry to not have seen the city of San Marcos come in as a partner on any of these that would have taken some of those lands as, I mean, maybe the sellers aren't interested, But if they have it just on the market, it's too bad San Marcos isn't willing to take a park approach to some of those, along with y'all as conservation partners.
Sure. Yeah.
Catherine, I was thinking the same thing. We need to get San Marcos and all of their funding available for some of these projects, but it is what it is now. And I think they have funded projects in the past. And I think if you see that loop, I believe that some of those properties were funded through San Marcos, and hopefully we'll see them do more in the future.
It's fair to say
Got a
that
week. They got a week left to send us something in PIF form, don't they?
light a fire. Yeah.
Especially stuff along Purgatory Creek. I mean, it's right there.
Other questions for Frank?
I don't know. This is Carolyn. I don't know if this is a good question or not, but with some of these properties, because of the city of San Marcos and development, were there any PIDs involved that would be changed by any of this?
No, I can't think of anything like that unless somebody else has some context for that. I don't.
Okay, thank you.
I thought La Cima was under a PID of sorts.
Yeah, I need to understand.
But that was actually a Hays County PID. It was not originally San Marcos, and then San Marcos annexed it, something like that.
Huh. Okay, I'm not sure about that then.
The PID does not cover the area that is proposed to be conserved under this proposal.
Got it.
I want to say that, like Scott, we're looking for, so we could hear back, just going back to Old Glory and John Knox, we could hear back any day from NRCS. We were supposed to hear back by end of week. And at that point, I just want to get a sense of how we navigate things with getting some timely commitment from the county and a sense of funding amounts. Because again, we'll have this very brief window where some hard decisions need to be made.
Well, you didn't give us a specific
Deadlines.
I mean, NRCS is, we've got Scott Parker dealing with an actual, group or single investor or property owner, and they have a contract. NRCS is a government entity, and I think you kind of said maybe 2 to 3 weeks. Do we really know? Is there someone that can set a deadline so that we have something to work with? Because if we can, we'll take all the time given to us, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for practical purposes today, to entertain it, I'd say that we'd be looking at, say, August 20th, just to pull a date off, or maybe even I might even say August 13th, because I'm thinking about the way their calendar year, their fiscal year works. So that would give us, a little longer than 2 weeks from, I guess is that 3 weeks from today? I think that's a reasonable expectation. I mean, from our end of what would remain feasible. And of course, this would all rely on us actually hearing from NRCS very soon.
Well, what is NRCS going to require?
They're going to say so let's say the money comes through for Old Glory Ranch. Let's say they say, okay, we've got about $2.5 million that could come to Old Glory Ranch. They need to know within that time period whether we're going to defer on that funding entirely or in part. Hard time of night here.
Somebody has something to say over there. You might want to put her on the camera.
Yeah. But essentially, they'll want to know very soon whether they need to feed this down to other projects, because they'll need to spend some time in grant obligation and such at that point. And if we kill too much time, the funding could just leave the state entirely. And so nobody wants to be a party to that, of course. So NRCS in Texas wants to take advantage of whatever money comes to them from their national headquarters, and they're looking to us to be responsive and timely in how much we're asking of them for each project.
Clear as mud. It sounds like we've got another potential project in Old Glory that we need to score sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions for Frank?
We don't need to score John Knox again. I don't believe, right? Because the project's not changing unless the funding level is different. Is that accurate?
Yeah, is the funding requested from the county different than what was requested in our last round?
My understanding is that there's been a recommendation that less than full funding would be obligated to John Knox Ranch. And our idea was that the NRCS funds could fill a funding gap if needed.
So the original 2.5 million request was for the full purchase price. And so,
yeah, we believe that the cost of the conservation easement would be about 2.381. And so that would request be a $1.5 million request from the county, with 831,000 coming from NRCS, presuming that money comes through.
So I think the original was 1.5, right, Scott?
We requested 2 to 2.5 in the original PIF.
yeah, that was our recommended amount. Those are the 1.5. So
1.5.
so no change there. So we really just need to,
with public access for trails or whatever, you know, not obviously across the entire parcel.
yeah, our notes indicated that we'd like some public access.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Other questions for Frank?
I think I'll get to my other job now if I can bow out gracefully. Great to see you all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Frank.
With that, I think that's our presentations for this evening. Are there any project application status updates? James?
I don't believe we've received any PIFs since the last meeting, have we, Alexandra?
Actually, yes, I think I did get some from San Marcos. So I will forward that to everybody and then upload it to the Dropbox folder.
Okay, and I talked to them yesterday and encouraged them to get them in sooner than later. I'll reach out to them and figure out when they want to try to schedule. I would imagine they might, no, we're full for the 4th. So they'll really be on to the meetings after the 4th. So really no updates other than we did receive from San Marcos some project applications, which gets to discussion of future meeting dates.
Yeah, I know that a doodle poll or whatever was sent out, and if you haven't gone in there, I am guilty of not going in there yet, and so I need to supply dates. Please, everyone, go in and let folks know when you're available so that we can set those dates when the most folks are available. Our next meeting is August 4th, and given that we've got 2 projects we're likely to discuss the scoring of on August 4th, we probably need to reserve 30 minutes for that, James. 15 minutes for each project.
Okay.
I'm not sure how that's going to impact timing. I know of one other potential application I saw in the Wimberley View this week that the city of Wood Creek had passed something about seeking park funding. I didn't read the full article, but we may be receiving something from the city of Wood Creek. Just an FYI.
So
Share with us who the presenters are on the 4th.
That's what I was looking for. I know for a fact Hill Country Conservancy on the Violet Crown Trail. And then city.
We should ask them if there's any true updates on that.
Yeah, they're
because
for
if there's no update on it, let's maybe push them off.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any changes to their original proposal. Maybe that's where we can find some room for time.
Okay.
So I just have one administrative when we're ready, Scott.
Sure, go ahead, Tom. Scott.
Just the videos of the recordings, if we could not put them on Dropbox and put them on Vimeo or YouTube, that'd be helpful, because it's just filling up Dropbox bandwidth.
Yeah, just create a link to those places.
Yeah, just doing a link to them, Alexandra. I don't know if that's something you can do, like put them on YouTube or like a private YouTube or a private Vimeo. It just, when you uploaded the last meeting, it just filled up my Dropbox. So I gotta do an upgrade to it to, pay more money to Dropbox. Not a big deal. Not a big deal. I'm happy to do it.
Well, let's drop that one out of it, so that doesn't create a problem for folks, and just provide a link.
Yeah, just a link would be great.
I know others have had issues with not having the size of Dropbox file that they need.
Right.
So I have actually worked with our communications manager to make sure that we can upload the meeting recordings to the county YouTube account. And so the meeting before this, she's put that video, I clipped it to just to where it actually, started the conversation and meeting began. Because there was some time recording on there that, everyone was still kind of showing up and just kind of waiting. So I clipped all that off. And so she said that she's uploaded it to the POSAC web page with a link that you can click, and then it'll take you to the YouTube page that has that video on there. So all the other meeting recordings, we'll be doing that the same way. And then, like to view the meeting from this date, like, having it a live link, and then it'll take them to YouTube. I think just for the sake of the meeting recordings, I've asked James, to put them on Dropbox just so that we can have that copy. But if that is something, I guess that would be easier and better for everybody to just kind of bypass, and maybe the recordings we can just send straight to Kim to put on YouTube.
If you can just share it with James rather than the POSAC, then that won't fill up our Dropbox.
Yeah. So I think that a good place to just always have a reference to is the POSAC page on the county's website. And so that will be the link to the YouTube. And so Alexandra, I'll make sure that I get him to you without going through the Dropbox.
Okay.
And then, yes, so your folks did update that link, and I actually looked at it earlier today, so I know it already goes to YouTube now. But we'll do that going forward, is make sure that you get them directly and not go through the Dropbox.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, I was looking at one, it's like 6 gigs. So Alexandra, if you could just delete those and put them on a link fashion, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Sure, I'll do that.
So one thing, excuse my ignorance on the Dropbox, is it asking y'all to download these things to your box?
No,
because I thought the box was almost like a cloud that you had access to, that it's hosted somewhere else. And
it's
so
a cloud, but James, all of us have access to the Dropbox. So right. If we have a subscription to Dropbox, it just sucks up the amount of data that we have on our Dropboxes or whatever. So if it was on Vimeo or on YouTube, it would just be in the cloud on their servers, right, versus on Dropbox or on our, if we have to download, or not download, but it syncs and it creates a sucks up our data.
Available. Okay, space.
There
Okay.
might be some file sharing that lives on the file sharing site and doesn't require us to have a matching amount for it, but Dropbox seems to require it of us.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Come up with the presentations for the 4th.
so presentations for the 4th. I just had it. Okay, here we go. Hill Country Conservancy Violet Crown is scheduled. San Marcos River Foundation is scheduled, 1 project, and then 5 projects for the city of Buda. So that's a total of 6, 7 projects right now that's scheduled.
The Smurf one is different because they're changing tracks from, it's substantially different from their first request.
So Buda, so could we talk about timing of who has what, right? So you said San Marcos has 1, right?
San Marcos River Foundation, yes, has 1.
Okay, and then Buda has 5.
5. Yes.
5 projects.
Yes.
So 5 projects for them. Are they getting the same time as San Marcos, or like
15 minutes per project?
Per project. So
Per project.
So we have 5 projects from them, and it's times 15, or
Yes,
I mean,
75 minutes. Yes. So that's an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes of presentations.
So for that, I mean, just for the POSAC committee here, I mean, is that fair? I mean,
That sounds like a lot of time.
yeah.
I guess we could ask, given that we've got to take on these other 2, whether or not Smurf would be willing to present at the following meeting, and if it's true that HTC's Violet Crown doesn't need to present at all, and then so we would just have Buda. Maybe, James, you need to call Buda and see how much time. Maybe they say, look, we only need 45 minutes for all 5 projects. We can get it done because they're I don't know, they're similar or they're adjacent. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at what those projects are, but just make sure, a 2-hour meeting is long enough. That's about all I think anyone can do and anyone should be asked to do. And we need 30 minutes for Old Glory and for the Presa Grande. Or sorry, is it Purgatory? It's Old Glory and Presa Grande that have the short timeline. Yeah. So do some juggling for us, please.
It may be, we may be able to get it all in. I'll check with Buda. They may not need 15 minutes per.
Great. All right. Well, we're already over our 2-hour limit, 15 minutes in, and I know someone's waiting for dinner for me. So
if you have not done the doodle poll, please do the doodle poll, because that's going to be a very important topic for the next meeting, because obviously we don't have anything scheduled after the 4th. And there needs to be, presentations to get in so that we can get these things done and try to maybe potentially, meet some of these deadlines or timelines of sponsors without jump through significant hoops. So,
got it. Anything else?
Who sent the doodle poll out? Was that Alexandra or James? Did you send that
Alexandra.
out?
Alexandra.
All right. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Great. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
See you all
much.
soon.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.